Welcome to Hanging at the Hangar Bar. I'm Scott.
I'm Candace.
I'm Lariah.
And I'm Lacey. Grab a drink and come hang with us at the Hangar Bar.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hangar Bar. I am glad that you are here with me today as I fall down yet another rabbit hole. Did you know that Walt Disney and his Imagineers were not the first people to make audio animatronics? In past episodes, I've talked about the fact that audio animatronics from the World's Fair walked so that the future versions could run. I had always thought that the first animatronics that Disney worked on were the Small World Kids and the Lincoln animatronic for the 1963 World's Fair. That led me to ask the question, when did animatronics make their way into Disneyland? Thus started what I think is a fairly interesting rabbit hole of looking at the history around them and how they ended up being one of the best things about visiting a Disney theme park. Today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the humble beginnings of animatronics, how Walt discovered them and made them what we think of today. We're going to explore some of the most unique examples from around the parks and how they have been used to change the way we think about the future of the parks as well. So sit back, grab yourself a drink, and let's fall down a rabbit hole together. Let's start this conversation by thinking through what an audio animatronic actually is. In its simplest form, you can think of it as not quite a robot, but a set of gears and mechanisms controlled by a computer to move to sounds and different cues. This is actually a much harder word picture than I thought it was going to be. But just try this. Picture a mannequin that is filled with mechanics that make it move and appear to talk. Then you would be getting close to the basic picture if you've not seen one of these before. They become so complex over the years that they've been used in movies, think Jaws or Jurassic Park, in the theme parks obviously, in restaurants such as Chuck E. Cheese and many other places. The most complex and expensive animatronic currently in use is in the Navi River Journey ride in Pandora within Animal Kingdom. I've seen cost estimates for that one animatronic, the Shaman of Song animatronic, anywhere from $10 million up to $24 million to make that one animatronic. My guess is it's probably closer to the 10 million range, but when you go on that ride, you would swear that Shaman of Song is real. It's really simply amazing, and that's not my favorite ride, but the animatronic is amazing. Disney's also created a recent animatronic that is more robotic, I think, on their Web Slinger attraction in Disneyland. This Spider-Man animatronic actually leaps from one building to another, flips, does all of these things from one roof to the next. It's amazing to sort of watch what they've done. So before I actually get into the question that led me to this episode, let's look at how we got to this level of complexity and realness. Is that even a word? I think today I'm going to call it one. So simple animatronics have been in use for thousands of years. As I dug into the history, I found many articles that documented the first animatronics and town square clocks that would have automated figures that danced or moved based on time cues as early as the 1400s. Over time, that wasn't enough, so they added sound to draw attention to these clocks as well. Music, chimes, characters beating drums, that kind of thing. These ornate clocks were town centerpieces and very advanced for the day and would draw crowds of people to watch. I think times were a little bit simpler then. Can you imagine talking to a group of friends or family today and saying, hey, let's go downtown and check out the clock? No, I don't think so. As you can imagine, as technology and innovation improved, parts were able to be made smaller, which led to the advent of pendulum-driven clocks by the 18th century or later after that, somewhere in that 1800s range. The cuckoo clocks that can be found hanging in homes all over the world today have this same basic technology and still use the same technology from when they were first created. A little bird pops out at a specified time to let you know what time it is. They chirp, they do whatever. These clocks become ornate and had many different scenes and actions, but all worked basically the same way. When the clock hit a certain time, it would trigger a mechanism to send the bird out of the door and chirp or hoot or whatever. These different clocks led to the advent of different toys. Obviously, those toys were not pendulum-driven, that would have mechanics that you would wind up and they would walk or dance or hop. Now, I am positive there's a lot that happened technology-wise between 1400 and where we're going to jump to now, which is the 1930s and 40s. But here we are anyway. We're hopping into a time machine, and we're now jumping hundreds of years.
I believe our adventure through time is taking a most serious turn.
We are staying in Europe, though, because we are finding Walt Disney and his family on vacation in the summer of 1949. Well, for Walt, it was a working vacation. Walt wanted to go to England to see how progress was going on his first fully live-action movie, Treasure Island. While traveling through Europe, they did all the family things. But one day, Walt went out on his own and did some shopping. He returned to the hotel with 2 big bags of mechanical toys for his daughters. From the Walt Disney Family Museum website, Diane Disney was quoted as saying, "Sharon and I were entertained by them and his manner." Her father, Walt, saw something in those toys and is quoted as saying, "It's amazing you can get such movement from a simple mechanism." Those toys were not very complex, but the family thinks that they may have been the precursor to what we know today as animatronics. I am wholly trusting the Family Museum website here for the history, but I also found a lot of articles and information out there saying that Walt, while in New Orleans in the early 50s, picked up an automated caged bird that sang and moved with mechanical movements and gave it to his wife Lillian as a gift, and that ultimately is what led to the tiki bird in the 60s. There very well could be a lot of truth about that too, and my guess is it's kind of a culmination of all of it. The idea just percolated and kept going in his head until it got to be what he wanted it to be. With all of that said, though, early in the 1950s, Walt had what would become known as Imagineering, working on the creation of a 9-inch tall figure that could move and talk. They even had Buddy Ebsen come in to perform his vaudeville routines under Walt's direction to get the movements. This project was titled Project Little Man and would eventually be tabled because they had something much bigger on the horizon, Disneyland. One of the things that I read about that project with that simple little 9-inch figure was it was still tied to tubes and things that as someone moved, it would move. And they were still trying to figure out how to do the recording to get it to do the repeated motions over and over and over again. But as time went on and Disneyland popped up on the horizon, they needed to drop that project and move on to Disneyland. So I don't know what I was thinking, but I wholeheartedly believe that the first animatronics at Disneyland didn't happen until after the World's Fair. I thought all of the animatronic knowledge and all of that kind of stuff went to making things for that. But in a moment of doubt, I Googled. Dangerous, I know. And then, as I'm sure you are all doing right now, chastised myself for being a little bit of an idiot. Well, I think you're probably chastising me. You're not chastising yourself. Just look at some of those opening day attractions at Disneyland. You had things like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, the Jungle Cruise, Peter Pan's Flight, Snow White's Enchanted Wish. 3 of the 4 that I just listed, you can still 100% get on when you go to Disneyland. And as I'm sure you figured out by now, all of those include some form of an animatronic. Let's look at the Jungle Cruise just a little bit deeper as our best example. Walt wanted what Animal Kingdom in Florida ended up being when he was opening Disneyland. Live animals on a safari or a jungle trek, something like that. That just wasn't possible in Southern California in the early to mid-50s. Heck, it probably still isn't, or it would have been done by now. They had to have an answer to be able to make this ride something, or this attraction something that families would want to go on. They had this boat ride and they needed animals. So they thought to themselves, these animals are probably big enough we could put motors and that kind of thing inside of them and have those animals just be a part of the ride that way. You never have to feed them. All of the things that were roadblocks became not roadblocks when they figured out how to put mechanics inside of these big animals. So they decided that they would make crocodiles, hippos, elephants, and all of those things with somewhat lifelike movements for the time and the creation ability that they had. They set out to do just that. And the first animatronics in a Disney park appeared on opening day in 1955. Just blew my mind. Again, I thought that all animatronics came much, much later. So how in the world did I get the idea in my head that it wasn't until after the World's Fair that animatronics showed up in the park? Well, it seems that it might be just a little bit of a bias in my mind about what we call animatronics today. I wasn't thinking about set pieces that moved on their own. I was thinking about Tiki Birds, Mr. Lincoln, John from Carousel of Progress, those kinds of animatronics. After the success of Disneyland and the use of animatronics, Walt saw a different use for mechanical things that could move and sing and talk. As with any technology, heck, I even demonstrated it to you a couple of minutes ago with clocks. The technology was getting better and better. Walt demanded the technology get better and better. The first idea was to build a restaurant that would have birds, probably after seeing the caged bird he had given to Lillian, that would interact with the guests while they ate. I think about this concept with the birds as I'm describing that, much like what you might think a rainforest cafe would be if you've been to one of those recently or ever, with all the different animatronics around and that kind of environment. It was in the design and imagineering of this concept that we got an anecdote from Walt that he was looking at these animatronic birds and simply wanted them to be more realistic. They were just, I think they looked the same as the wind-up one that was in the cage that he gave to Lillian. He wanted it to be more realistic. He told his Imagineers, figure out how to make them breathe. So they did. They figured out a way to make these mechanical birds breathe. Those birds were never put into a restaurant like the original thought was, but would be used for a new attraction, a little something you might know as the Tiki Room. That opened the same year as the World's Fair. While they were making this restaurant/attraction for the theme park, Walt jumped full force into World's Fair mode. For the World's Fair, he created, and I say he, the Imagineers, a lot of smart engineers and all of that kind of thing were behind him, but leading the company and the charge and the imagination behind of it, he gets all the credit. But he created a few things we all know about that included animatronics. He created the great moments with Mr. Lincoln and the Carousel of Progress were the two big ones. Autopia was also created for the World's Fair. Small World was created for the World's Fair, but that didn't include the Autopia didn't really include any animatronics, but Small World certainly did. This is a well-known story, so I won't dwell on it for too long, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how Disney figured out that they needed to invent or find a clear hydraulic fluid. This story just always cracks me up because I try and picture myself in the moment. So the Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln attraction was hugely popular at the World's Fair. Much like the Carousel of Progress, lines stretched out for hours waiting to get a seat in the theater for the show. This animatronic was so realistic for the time, the audience didn't believe that it wasn't an actor up there. So they would throw things at this animatronic to see if they could get the character to break. Even back then, people could be a-holes. The funny part of this Moments with Mr. Lincoln, though, is that the movement was driven by hydraulics. At one point in an early show, as Mr. Lincoln stood up from his seat to talk about something important, he began to bleed red hydraulic fluid. This was 100 years after his assassination, but I still think too soon pops into my head when I see a bleeding Abraham Lincoln on stage. If you think about Disney and quality, this is the kind of thing that they have to think about. It can happen once, but then you figure out how to fix it by finding a different way around with things that already exist, or if it doesn't, you find a way to invent it yourself. That kind of innovation continues to lead animatronics today. If you go on Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, for example, you can see an example of them trying to improve some of the limitations that they have with animatronics. With a traditional animatronic, you don't get a lot of facial expression, you don't get a lot of eye movement. The mechanics that go into that make it really hard to get good eye movement, all of those kind of things that make it seem less than real. So for Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, the animatronics they built actually have faces that to me almost seem screen-like. but they show a broader array of facial expressions and mouth movement and that kind of thing. And then they went and improved upon that tech when they opened up Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railroad. Yeah, I personally don't think that this is the future of animatronics. It looks too much like a screen to me, but it's a step in a direction of creating some of that realism that they're going to need for what I think animatronics are going to become. It's still really cool tech, and is an example of them continuing to innovate in the animatronic space for the parks. If you think about the Walt Disney Company and innovation, you also think about innovation in animation. You think about innovation in live action and cartoons existing together. But they also innovate in other ways in just their regular movie-making business as well. In 1964, when Mary Poppins was released, you can see the first audio animatronic that was used in a motion picture film. The bird that perches on Mary's hand and sings with her is an audio animatronic. Here's a fun fact for your next Disney trivia night. Feel free to steal this, or if you just want to impress people as you walk through the grocery store, I won't judge. Do you know that the bird in the window of the first scene of Carousel Progress is the same bird that was used in the filming of Mary Poppins? Well, now you know. Use this information wisely. I mentioned in the intro how animatronics are used in movies today. When it would be cost prohibitive to have actors or CGI do it for you, or if you just want a sense of realism that you don't get from CGI. Some of the characters you know that maybe you didn't know were animatronics included, as I mentioned, Jaws, but other lovable folks like E.T., Jabba the Hutt, Willy from Free Willy, every dinosaur from Jurassic Park, Gizmo, King Kong were all animatronics. They continue to get more and more complex as technology improves, and they can use those in such unique ways to drive realism, and it helps actors have something to play off of when there's something right there. It's just so interesting. In Disney parks around the world, they're also playing with Grogu being out in public with the Mandalorian. We have BB-8 that rolls around and interacts with people at meet and greets. I have some belief that over time, the line between animatronic and robot will eventually blur even more, and you might be walking around Galaxy's Edge interacting with a truly robotic C-3PO that is asking you questions and responding to you in real time. You may even see these animatronics gain enough complexity that they could replace some character meet and greets. I think we're a long ways away from that kind of interactivity, but when you see the work they are doing with realism now, it isn't a huge stretch to think with the artificial intelligence that exists now and all of this technology that they're putting into animatronics, it's a possibility. Part of Walt's drive for animatronics was cost savings and consistency. Think about the Carousel of Progress for a minute. It's the longest running stage show ever, and it has something like 3 complete shows per hour across a nonstop 12 to 15 hour park day. As much as I would love to say that having human actors would make that even better, it would be cost prohibitive and inconsistent. When you go into that attraction, you know exactly what you're going to get every single time. And the actors don't demand pay increases and breaks. They can just keep going all day long. Nobody does animatronics quite like Disney does. And they keep getting better and better. It's even to the point that when they closed Splash Mountain, some of the biggest outcry about them closing Splash Mountain wasn't the amount of belovedness for that ride. It wasn't that they were closing down that IP, which is, we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, is a little bit questionable. It wasn't that Tiana was getting her own ride. The biggest outcry was that they were going to get rid of the animatronics and make it more screen-based, because Disney has shown that they've done some of that. It's still to be seen what they're really going to do with that. I'm interested, but I am encouraged because they're talking about some new animatronic characters that are coming to that ride as part of the storytelling. So they know that animatronics is a big piece of what they do. I am more excited about animatronics than I ever have been. And I think personally, it's one of the biggest reasons Disney is far and away better than better than anyone else out there trying to do the same. So I appreciate you all sticking with me through this rabbit hole episode. I learned a lot as I was digging in, and I hope that you did too. Let me know on our socials what you thought of this episode, or if there are any interesting animatronic facts that you think I missed or that we should know about. And as always, remember, there is a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, and we will see you real soon.